possible.
The only thing,
The only way,
the best way,
the surest way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, is a good woman with a gun.
Destined for more.
The president of Spina di Rosula, the shotgun umbrella, and of course 99% of Fontaine's artillery has finally returned for a rerun, and naturally the big question is, should you get her? Well, let me start off by saying I think Navia is a lot of fun, and you know, she can be very, very satisfying to play. Her skill hits like a truck, and her ult supports her, so that's why she is one of the most, exciting characters in the game. Now, when she was first released, she did have a rather unique gameplay experience with that high impact, low frequency damage, of course tied to her skill in this case, but these days that kind of niche and that kind of experience is much more available now, with characters like Molani doing something very similar. So even though it's still very, very satisfying, I feel like if you're trying to go for that kind of experience, Navia is an option, but you may want to consider Molani instead. So, that being said though, I don't use Navia as much these days as my absolute favorites anymore. It's not really Navia that is causing me to not use her that much, it's actually kind of Geo, with the possible exception of specifically Shilinen and on occasion Yunjin. I don't really find myself using most Geo characters, even the illustrious Ningguang, the Tianchuan of the Liu Qixing, a character that I previously considered my main, or one of my 3 mains. I don't really play her that much anymore. So I feel like with all of that into account, I would probably say, just to swing back to the original question, should you get her? Probably not. But if you really, really like her, then oh yeah, absolutely, you should definitely get her. I don't think I regret getting her. I just don't play her as much as I would hope, I guess. That's just my opinion on Navia in the grand scheme of things. And then if that's what you're here for, then thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, because there are going to be more things incoming in Genshin, especially with the upcoming update. So I'll be streaming it. I'll be potentially streaming it on Twitch and YouTube, depending on how I feel. And of course, there's going to be a lot of things to talk about afterwards. So don't forget to hit that bell icon so you can be notified of the latest and greatest videos on the channel. Now, if you're sticking around, let's go through the usual things that we go through, just to remind ourselves of what is the dealio with Navia. This is basically the guide part of the video, if you will. So, let's start off with what's new with Navia, and before we continue, I just want to remind everyone that Navia tends to run in a double Geo team with 2 Fek characters on top. Usually. This is not always, but this is the usual way to do this, and this is because of one of her passives that encourages doing something like that. So with that in mind, let's talk about how Burn Crystallise teams have been improved significantly with the introduction of Emily Kinich and, hell, even Mawika. All of these characters can be quite useful, with the possible exception of Kinich. If you're playing Fuliar Ahau, for example, then I suppose you could potentially use Kinich instead. But as a general thing, Emily is good, Mawika is of course very, very good, Kinich not so much. And if you're going to play with Mawika, you probably want to bring along Shilinen, who is of course another new character who has shown up in the game. Shilinen of course being a really, really solid second Geo option with the red shreds, scroll buffs, P-Patrol song, and if your name is Katagari, you have C2 buffs as well to think about. So that's a thing. Alternatively, of course, Kachina is another character that came out with Natlan, and she's actually pretty good. There is one thing that Kachina can do that Shilinen can't do, which is, of course, generate crystallized shards of fields, so that's really, really nice as well. Now, meanwhile, we also have another support character who's really good for Navia, and that is, of course, Iansan, a top-tier attack buffer for Navia, who can basically give Navia pretty much every single buff that she needs for the most part. Now, that being said though, it is a little bit more trickier to use Navia with Iansan if you're trying to maintain that buff meter. If you have C4 Iansan, things do get a lot easier, but it's still not entirely foolproof. I feel like Navia's experience with Iansan is not nearly as good as like Arlecchino's experience with Iansan, for example. We also have some cryo options available with Navia's rerun, being of course Citlali and Escoffier. They're both really only there for the cryo app, so I feel like if you're going to play them, you might as well stick with Layla or Rosaria instead. And otherwise, the other new characters that have existed in the game now, Molani, Chaska, the Animo units being Aoife, Mizuki, or Lanyan, yeah, they don't seem terribly useful. There is Orodon though, who I feel like personally is not going to be super duper useful, but I suppose if you're playing some kind of electro charge team with Crystallise, maybe it's fine. I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of that myself. So instead, my two favorite teams are of course going to be a standard Navia team. In my case, I'm running with Yelan, so I have Shielded, Iansan, and Yelan as well. You can of course bring Farina if you want. I just feel like Yelan is a little bit better because at the end of the day, Navia does tend to do some normal attacks as part of her gameplay loop. So we have a lot of buffs. We're able to get Navia to do quite a lot of damage. We do like that. The alternative team that is my favorite as well is of course Rocket Barrage with Ningguang. There's two variants of course. There is the C2 shielded variant where the final slot needs to be a healer, otherwise no heals. Are you sure you want to do that? You also want a healer that has some feck application. My recommendations would be someone like Charlotte or Kogami. And then of course there is the alternative, which is just running Medic Mona and Farina instead, because you don't have C2 Shielded. This is of course a team that does quite a lot for both Navia and Ningguang. Now when it comes to building Navia, let's just quickly go through her weapons. Obviously her axe is still very much her best in slot, but famously it has always only ever been slightly better than Serpent Spine. That being said though, I do want to mention now, we know for a fact that Navia is running with Escoffier, which means the axe is running with Escoffier's Spear. Escoffier's Spear is actually a weapon that if you use it on your C6 Iansan, you actually power creep C6 Bennett. And therefore, I highly recommend going for the Spear. And so if you're going for the Spear, there is a chance you might oopsie daisy into getting the axe, in which case you can use the axe on Navia. So that is of course really, really nice. Also, the axe looks really, really cool as well, so you know, style points count. Now, alternatively, there is another new claymore that came out called 1,000 Blazing Suns, and for some inexplicable reason, Hoyo accidentally made this weapon so unfathomably strong that it's actually on par with Navia's axe. The big difference is that you can't start your rotation with Navia's ult. So you basically need to delay Navia's cannon artillery strikes until it's time for her to start popping off. So it's a little bit of a different way of playing Navia. If that is the case, according to KQM, it's on par with the axe. If you don't do that, and you only end up with like 50% uptime on the passive of 1,000 Blazing Suns, then it is very much not on par with the axe. It might actually be on par with Serpent Spine though, so I don't know about that. Now, otherwise, Serpent Spine, of course, being a really solid 4-star to the point where it is actually close in damage increase to the axe, so that's something to consider instead. But my personal preference for 4-star is still going to be Melusine, mainly because I get that extra ER. There's a lot of attack that comes with this kind of weapon. I can make up the crit value loss by building her slightly better, and so because of that, the ER that comes from Melusine means I get to consistently and regularly use my cannons, which actually means I get to consistently regularly rely on Navia to generate her own ammo, as opposed to needing like an off-fielder like Kachina, for example, which does in fact fix the quote-unquote weakness that Shilin has with regards to Navia teams, so that is of course going to be really, really nice. When it comes to building Navia's artifacts, Nighttime of Whispering Woods is pretty much the way to go. Hell, it's even stronger boxable now. In Hoyo's Infinite Wisdom, they did that early, so you can even do that. So it's kind of no excuse not to use Nighttime of Whispering Woods. And so while you're building Nighttime, 2-piece Geo and attack, or 4-piece Golden Troop, that's just your placeholder artifact sets. Comes to artifact stats, attack, Geo, crit. That's it. There's no real dancing around with that. She's really straightforward in that regard. And finally, let's just have a quick look at Navia's Constellations. And once again, I'm going to say this a lot, you don't need Navia's Constellations. In fact, the damage that you're seeing in this video B-roll is actually from a C0 Navia who's also level 80. So I think that should basically tell you everything you need to know about how valuable Navia's Constellations are. That being said though, I mean, C1 does make her a bit more nice and fluid and does make things a little bit easier for you, so that's kind of nice. In general though, you know, if you want to actually be able to launch the cannons a lot more, if you want to be able to ults, that's something you can do. It's kind of like C2 Shilinen but the electro buff. Meanwhile, C2 is supposed to be a pretty decent DPS increase, and it can also fix some of that crit rate problem that you might be having with your build, and so with that it might actually be easier to use Melusi. C3 is skill bonuses, C5 is ult levels, both of them are generally useful. That being said though, I don't think I've really ever cared about how much damage my ult cannons are doing, so maybe that's not that useful. C4 is some res shred. I don't think it's going to be all that valuable considering that we already have quite a few sources of that available already for Geo. Shilinen exists, Zhongli, Geo Resonance, which is usually something that you're going to have in your team. And then finally we have C6, which unironically makes that great Navia like a lot better, possibly than even Axe Navia if you ask me. Because of all that ammo refunding, you basically get huge crit value from the C6, which kind of means the crit value that you're getting from the Axe is mostly wasted. And then on top of that, with the ammo refunding, you kind of are incentivized to try and get 3 shotgun blasts, which is a little bit difficult when you're not using Sackgrade, but with Sackgrade you can very easily get that sorted out. So yeah, that's kind of hilarious in that case. Now, that's pretty much it. Navia still got it. She's still really, really strong. She's still really, really satisfying. If you like shotguns, this is your character. She's not like Omega busted super meta or anything like that, but we don't need her to be. She still hits really, really hard, so that's really, really good, you know? Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. How do you feel about Navia? And do you play her a lot still? Let me know in the comments. Once again, my Navia is level 80 C0. She still does crazy levels of damage. So yeah, anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Epic action, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.